And
yes, ma'am, recording is start.
all right. So, guten Abend. I welcome all of you on behalf of the Global Languages Center, Opacity Global University, to the online guest lecture series on Franz Kafka. Now, you would all agree with me that we live in turbulent times today, where one is forced to revisit one's existing notions of right and wrong, true and false, fair and unjust. These are the times when one feels asphyxiated if asked to cogently describe one's present condition. In such times, when we are looking for a way to describe the paradoxes that surround us today, Franz Kafka's writings serve as a semantics voice box that gives shape to the unutterable, the indescribable, the irreconcilable, the fragile. Scholars have seen in Kafka's writings allegories of intra-human matters, such as Judaism, Zionism, modern alienation, metaphysical concepts, and psychoanalytical ideas. And yet, the texts present what the Kafka scholar Gerhard Neumann calls gleitendes Paradox, or the sliding paradox. Adorno notes that in Kafka's text, each sentence says, "Interpret me," and none will permit it. Albert Camus, in the appendix to the Myth of Sisyphus, writes, "The whole art of Kafka consists in forcing the reader to reread. His endings and his absence of endings suggest explanations which, however, are not revealed in clear language, but before they seem justified, require that the story be reread from another point of view." It is in this spirit of patiently reading and rereading Kafka that I conceived of the course Learn to Read German with Kafka at the JGU. The idea was to bring students with no prior knowledge of German a step closer to the German language and thought by engaging with an author. The primary goal of the course is to impart reading skills in German and learning reading strategies, re-engage with texts, learn how to read German words and identify sentence structures, which then culminates in the thematic discussions on the themes raised in the text. It was with the intention of enriching our discourse and tapping into the already existing prolific work on Franz Kafka in India that I turned to experts from diverse fields, ranging from filmmaking, theater, animal studies, translation, philosophy to literature to accompany us on our journey. And I'm extremely grateful to all the speakers for having agreed to contribute to our discourse, hence enabling our students, the JGU students, and so many other students in understanding Kafka better. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Anu Pandey, Assistant Professor of the Department of Germanic Studies, EFLU, who will be speaking on Kafka's Zoopoetics. VAIBHAV ABNAVE, independent researcher and filmmaker, who will tell us about his latest film on Kafka's A Report to an Academic. Professor Rajendra DENGLE, who is also with us, retired professor, Center of German Studies, JNU, who will speak on the themes of opacity and imagination in Kafka's shorter texts. Dr. ROSY SINGH, Associate Professor and current Chairperson at the Center of German Studies, JNU, who will speak about the existential predicament in Kafka's text, The Burrow. And of course, our very first speaker, who we have amongst us, Dr. SHIPRA CHATURVEDI, who will be speaking on the topic, Translating Kafka Between Dilemmas and Choices. SHIPRA, thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. SHRUTI, to give me this platform.
Let me briefly introduce our first speaker to all of you. Yeah, SHIPRA, let me do that first, just very briefly. Though there are so many things to be said about you. So Dr. SHIPRA CHATURVEDI has a PhD in chemistry. She has been teaching German since 1984 at premier institutions such as the Indian Institute of Management, the EFLU, Amity University, Babu Banarsi Das University, Lala Bahadur Shastri Institute of Management and Development, and has been running her own in German Language Institute, German Academy, in collaboration with Max Müller Bhavan, New Delhi, since 1996. She's also been a counselor for the course Diploma in Teaching German as a Foreign Language at the IGNO. Now, Dr. CHATURVEDI is a prolific writer and translator, and that's why she's here with us today. She has translated and published several German literary texts into Hindi. She is a 3-time recipient of the prestigious scholarship from the translation house Lorraine, Switzerland. She has also written several blurbs for German books available on the website of German Book Office, New Delhi. She has presented her translations in many vital platforms. In fact, it was only yesterday that we had the pleasure to hear Dr. CHATURVEDI in conversation with the Austrian author Katharina Winkler at the ongoing Jaipur Literary Festival, where she read out excerpts from her Hindi translation of the book Blue Jewelry in the presence of the author herself. It was indeed a treat listening to you, SHIPRA. So with that, I now pass on the virtual mic to you, SHIPRA. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. SHRUTI, for a nice introduction. Translation at present is passion for me. I like doing translation, and the root behind this is I like reading. And again, this goes back in my childhood days. I read a good literature, a lot of good literature at home. We had a very decent collection of Hindi literature, like Premchand, Yashpal, Bhagwati Charan Verma, Yash, and all this. And not only the original Hindi literature, we had a good collection of translated literature too, Bengali to Hindi, Ravindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra, Sharat Chandra, Shankar. So all this. And apart from that, I had even Rusi Lok Kathaएं in Hindi, and Gorky's Ma, and Gorky's Mere Vishwavidyalaya. And at time I used to think, do we have only Russian literature translated into Hindi? Because I had exposure of Russian literature only. But that reading kept on going with me in my life. And after doing while doing my research in chemistry, I started learning German. And I did all the German language courses from Max Muller Bhavan. So, of course, we didn't read literature in my courses, but that teaching, that learning in Max Muller Bhavan enabled me to learn, to read the literature, to enjoy this. And then again, that desire to translate came up, auftauchen, we can say. And then, of course, I didn't start immediately, but suddenly there was a workshop, translation workshop organized by Max Muller. I participated in that. And in that workshop, we were supposed to translate some texts, and these texts were given to different experts. The experts didn't know who are the participants, or nor we knew who are the experts. But of course, after this assessment, we were apprised of that comment, and that comment was really positive, and that kept me going, and I started. And then after doing a small bit of translation, readers means, of course, from close circle only, they appreciated this. They said it's smooth, it doesn't sound like a translation, it's good, I can feel, but that kept me going. So after this translation, but then see, I was reading a lot of books since my childhood, and while after doing this German language courses, I started reading German. Again, German reading and German translating are two different things. Reading is for your pleasure. I mean, I am enjoying it myself. But when I translate, I have to ensure that what I am reading from the author, that content is dispelled to the reader. That's a very big responsibility. And one cannot be 100% sure, but one can make 100% effort definitely. So, and there are so many factors involved in this. So that's how my work started. The most important role played by is in my translation, that is by Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin and Lorraine, Translation House Lorraine. How? See, first of all, I was in Berlin Literarisches Kolloquium as a part of the translation workshop conducted by Max. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank
Okay. So as a part of that translation workshop, and then in that workshop also we translated one novel in presence of the author, and we had a English translator also, Katie Derbyshire, and we discussed that. So that kind of exposure gives you confidence that what you are doing, is it not off the track, it is right on the track. Then again, I went to Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin, where the German authors presented their literature to the translators, public of course, and the translators from all over the world. So then again, it was a very good exposure among translators from each other, and we could talk to each other, we could find the problems. And the best thing, the publishers were open, with the open arms, welcomed us. Collect, take the books, whatever you feel like, and like read. And we were not able to know what to take, what to leave. So those two things. And in the translation house, that was a very important thing. We were given a scholarship to stay there for a month and translate my book. And I tell you, out of my 4 books, 3 books I have translated in 1 month, each in translation house Lorraine. And why I could accomplish this and how I could accomplish this is because there was nothing to do. Number 1. Number 2, the atmosphere. Number 2, the ambience. I mean, every translator, you see all the translators working from on their own project, and they are working on different projects. When you sit in the library, when you sit in the dining room, you talk to each other, you talk, share their experience. So, and of course, the office. And the best thing which I tried from my side, I tried to meet the author when I was in Lorraine. So every time I was there, I tried to meet the author, and we discussed the problems. Obviously, when we read some books, we have so many doubts coming my way. So I could write it down. I could discuss this with the authors, and luckily my authors gave me open check that I can contact them on WhatsApp or mail whenever I have some problem. So that gives me confidence in translating. So I feel that's a very important thing. Now, when I started translating, what challenges?
Just a second. Do you want me to share the PPT?
No, not right now. You can
please let me know.
Okay, share it. Okay, so then what kind of challenges I faced? First of all, when I started doing this, people around me say, German to Hindi, why Hindi? Who reads Hindi? And where do we get publisher? Who is going to publish it? Who is going to read it? There's a very small readership. I mean, the very discouraging attitude. But I was determined to translate it to German to Hindi only. First thing, Hindi is my mother language, and the kind of comfort I feel in Hindi, I don't feel in German or English. Although English is our working language. Whole of the day we talk to each other, we work in English, but still, I think my vocabulary, my expression range is much better in Hindi rather than any other language. Second thing, I thought, when I'm translating a German language, a foreign language literature, it should be into my mother language, not another foreign language. For me, English is a foreign language, not my mother language. So I decided German to Hindi. Now, after deciding this, German, Hindi, where to get the books, how to select the books, that was a hilarious, Herculean task. Because I was, to get exposure to the books, to get exposure to the library, and then to decide, and then what to read, what to translate, what will be enjoyed by Indian people, what is important in Germany and will get importance in India also. These all questions were very difficult to decide. Okay, so finally you decide something. Now, are you translating a contemporary author or a classic? So again, I'll share some of my experience. I approached, if it is a novel, then it's okay, no problem. The novel is coming as it is, but if it is a story, then you have to approach to some magazines for publishing it. So the kind of comments I got, Kafka. Who understands Kafka? Who will read? Okay. Franz Holler. Franz Holler. Who knows Franz Holler in India? Do Kafka. So whatever you're doing, nobody is going to encourage you. Rather, people are saying, "Arey, what?" See, they had reasons to deny your work. So, and then after, if you are translating a contemporary author, then it's a very important thing. You have to buy copyrights, which is a very, very complicated procedure. It requires a lot of time, money, energy, everything. After that, you have decided the language pair, you have decided the book, and you have determined to take it out. Now, the content, the translated content comes to the reader. Now, prepare yourself. Keep your heart big and open. Reader has all the right to find fault in that. So prepare yourself to listen to this. So that is how this all journey is. It's not easy. Then what I have translated so far, some stories from J.P. Hebel, Grimm Brothers, of course, Franz Kafka, Karl Valentin, August Hoffmann von Fallersleben, Günther Stringel, Stefan Zweig, Bertolt Brecht, Siegfried Lenz, Rainer Maria Rilke, Franz Holler, Zehra Ipshiroliu, Katharina Winkler, Ulrike Almut Zandisch, and some, perhaps I missed out something. So while translating, I noticed. Can I have the second slide? Can I have the second slide, please? Shruti. While translating this, I noticed there are so many other things apart from knowing the language, which plays important role in translating. Like, especially in Franz Kafka, one has to be aware of what kind of life this person had, what kind of literary work, what are the specialties, and where was he born, where was he educated, what was his personal life, in which country he was writing, in which period he has written, and what was his personal life, what were the social political conditions in the country in which he was writing. Why I am saying, we'll get to know during this course, this discussion of this course, this thing plays very, very important role. So first of all, I will start with Franz Kafka's life. Kafka was born in Czech, Prague, in 1883, and he had 6 siblings, 2 brothers who died right in the childhood when Kafka was not even 7 years old, and his 3 sisters died in Second World War. He had a lonely childhood. His father was a very dominating personality, and mother was, in contrary to that, was shy and quiet. Why he had a lonely childhood? Because Kafka's father was a businessman, and his mother had to help him out in his work. So they were all the siblings were raised by domestic helps only. So that is again a very important thing, lonely childhood. Then he came to school. Can I have the next slide, please, Shruti? School education. He was sent to a Jewish education elementary level. There he studied for 13 at the age of 13, and then it ended there, the elementary school level. Then he was admitted to a rigorous German classic gymnasium. The medium of instruction was German, and he was very good in studies. Although he knew Czech, he was very good in German also, and he did very well in his education, school days. After finishing his school, he came to college, higher education. He started with chemistry, but somehow he didn't like it, or maybe he did not get interest in that, got interested, and then he left this and he studied law. In law, during the course of law learning, he met a friend, his best friend, I would say, Max Brod. Max Brod noticed that Kafka very rarely spoke, but whenever he spoke, it was usually profound. And Kafka became his best friend for the life. So then after education, he came to his professional life. His professional life, he started working in insurance company as a lawyer. He studied law, but somehow he had a feeling that it's not suiting him. He didn't like the timing of the work. If he was supposed to work from 8 o'clock in the morning till 18 hours in the evening, and so he left this job. He joined another job, that too in the same field, but perhaps he was interested. And although he was a very good worker, he was appreciated by his colleagues and seniors. Somehow, he had a feeling that law is wearing him out, because he had to work till late nights, till 2 p.m. and he hardly was left with any time which to pursue his literary pursuits, to do anything in writing, which he found a form of prayer for him. Writing was so important, is why assuming importance, more and more importance for him, and he was not able to give it time. So he was very dissatisfied with that. So again, we come back to his lonely childhood. Then education, even in the college time, school college time, we see that he was a shy person, not an extrovert, not speaking too much. And then after this, in the professional life also, he is not happy with the conditions in which he is. So that is one thing we are noticing constantly. Then, as far as personal life is concerned, he got engaged thrice, but never got married. Although he never got married, but he held marriage and education and children in high esteem. Now, this is his personal traits. Again, we notice here that he is not satisfied, is not happy. Then, but apart from this, Kafka was a very intelligent person, and he had got a good sense of humor, as people say. He was handsome. He was an accomplished rider, swimmer, and rower. So these are additional characteristics of Kafka. Kafka was sick. He had laryngeal tuberculosis, and this was deteriorating day by day. There was a time when he was finding difficult to eat. So this was deteriorated to so much that he died in 1924. And after this, before his death, he left all his work to his friend Max Brod with explicit instructions that the literature should be burned and should never see light. But luckily, his friend did not heed to his instructions. He completed and brought it, and now we are having a session on this, and the whole literary world is considered Kafka's work as pearl of literature. So good that Max Brod didn't listen this. Now then we come to his literary work. What he has written. Can we have the next slide, please? He left unfinished novels, dozen of short stories. He wrote everything in German. Apart from writing, he was etching also, and he was drawing also. But nothing could be achieved. Most of the things were burned by himself. Only 40% of drawings were collected. Among his famous stories are the first thing I would like to say, Das Urteil, the judgment. And the story is often considered Kafka's breakthrough work. It deals with the troubled relationship of a son and his dominant father, facing a new situation after the son's engagement. Kafka later described writing as a complete opening of body and soul, a story that evolved as truth, true birth covered with filth and slime. Then came the Verwandlung, the metamorphosis. This is the story here begins with a traveling salesman. He wakes up one day to find himself transformed in a monstrous insect. Critics find this work as one of the seminal work of fiction of 20th century. Then came the Straff Colony. In this book, he dealt with the elaborate torture and execution device that was written in 1914, then revised in 18 and published later in 1919. Then came the book, the story Hunger Artist. It was published and it described a victimized protagonist who experienced the decline in the appreciation of his strange craft of starving himself to the extended periods. His last story, Josephine, the singer or the mouse of folk, also deals with the relationship with the artist and his audience. His novel, Der Heizer, the Stoker, the Disappearing Man, the Trial, the Castle are referred to very important treasure of the literature, not only German literature, all over. Then what were the specialists of Kafka's writing? This is something very important. As Shruti right now said, Kafka writes something and the language is not very difficult. The words are not very difficult. But one sentence you read this, he used freely idioms and phrases and interpretation is very difficult. It has layers. Every time you read the same sentence, every time you bank upon another layer of that sentence. So more you read, more you get about Kafka. It's a depth. He writes from insight, not from premonition. He is sometimes taken as religious writer, but his supernatural elements in his fables are too entangled in concrete everydayness. Franz Kafka, his work is characterized by anxiety and alienation, and his characters often face absurd situations. People say Kafka was absurd. Technically speaking, the word absurd is a state of conflict between our capacity to find a pattern, purpose, or meaning in the world, and our inability to find any in patternless, purposeless, or meaningless world. His philosophy on the purpose of human existence is faithful to the ideas of existentialism. Man is a fragile entity of insignificant possibilities. In the face of such truth, Kafka fails to provide a solution other than to accept the condition presented. See, this is all reflection of his own life. Kafka wanted to articulate what happens when we find ourselves in a world that does not make any sense, especially when we are hardwired on a very basic level to make sense of the world around us. This enduring conflict between our desire to make sense and our constant failure to make any has been a source of lifelong reflection and misery for Kafka's 40 years of life. Another thing that also kept Kafka awake in his night of anxiety was the conflict between our natural tendencies and the modern artificial settings in which we tend to live. Our natural instincts are constantly kept in check by society in the form of restrictions, rules, laws, and norms that diverge our two selves from our meeting. Kafka's work represents an extreme example of modern concern with the individual's place in society. As modernity displaced people from traditionally society's fixed meanings and fixed family networks, Kafka exposes the emptiness and even the perniciousness of the world in which meaning is not only absent but malevolent toward the individual, lacking a transcendent source of value. society is not a place, hospitable place, and meaning is menacing. If there's one word that captures everything about his legacy, it is that Kafka was a writer of contradictions, a buzzing, confusing, fragmentary, giant world of contradictions. In other words, Camus, one of the most fundamental paradoxes of human existence, where one part of human consciousness want to find meaning in their lives, and the other part simply can't find no matter how hard it tries. Now, people say he's a penner of paradoxes. What is a paradox? Well, to put it literally, a paradox is, sorry, what is a paradox? Well, to put it literally, a paradox is contradictory statement or proposition that is nonetheless true. Now, when Jason Raza once said that Kafka is a denizen of twilight, that doesn't mean that Kafka's world is dark. It means that it is the contradictory realm of time when it's neither light nor dark. It is both light and dark at the same time, a supposed contradiction, a kind of paradox. Kafka, there was another novel which I would like to mention here, The Trial, in which a man is charged with a crime. In the whole book, the crime is never mentioned, what crime, but the whole novel goes on that. So there's some peculiar style of writing of Kafka. Then Kafka used a lot of ambiguous idioms and phrases, which makes interpretation difficult for reader and for translator. Now, from my own experience, I found it is his control of syntax. When he uses long sentences, they are carefully constructed so as to lead up to the final word of phrase. As it is in German language, the sentences are very long and you cannot interpret it till you come to the end of the sentence. So you have to be very careful to come to the conclusion what the sentence is going to say. And especially Kafka's, you have to be much more careful. Now, what I have read, what I have told so far, I'll elaborate this with the two stories. The one story is Der Neue Advokat, the new advocate, and the other is Artus manuscript, the old manuscript. These two stories are written by Kafka, and again the stories I would read out. I would request Dr. SHRUTI to read out the text in German, and somebody would read in English, and then I'll read it Hindi, and then we'll speak about that text, how and why and where. As I discussed so much about Kafka's life, personal life, why did I discuss this? And how did I associate my translation with his personal life? So, the first story is The New Advocate. In the story is about a new lawyer, Dr. Bucephalus. The author describes his similarity with the war horse of Alexander from Macedonia. And surprisingly, this comparison is accepted by the bar while giving the membership. And Bucephalus, he leaves himself in the law books, still and with a quiet lamp, far from the din of Alexander battle. He reads and turns the pages for his old books. That is the summary of the story. Now, we would like to read the text in German first. Dr. SHRUTI, would you read the text in German?
Yes, sure. Wir haben einen neuen Advokaten, den Dr. Bucephalus. In seinem Äußeren erinnert wenig an die Zeit, da er noch Streitros Alexanders von Mazedonien war. Wer allerdings mit den Umständen vertraut ist, bemerkt einiges. Doch sah ich letzthin auf der Freitreppe selbst einen ganz einfältigen, Gerichtsdiener mit dem Fachblick des kleinen Stammgastes, der Wettrennen den Advokaten bestaunen, als dieser, hoch die Schenkel hebend, mit auf dem Marmor aufklingendem Schritt von Stufe zu Stufe stieg.
Would somebody read that in English also?
Yes?
Is somebody going to read that, the English version?
Of course. Sanidhya?
Ma'am, can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Please. Yeah, Abhishek.
Yes, ma'am. So we have a new lawyer, Dr. Bucephalus. There is little reminiscence in his appearance of the time when he was once Alexander the Great's battle horse. However, those familiar with the circumstances notice something. But even a simple court attendant, whom I saw the other day on the front steps of the law courts, a man with the skilled eye of the regular modern racetrack follower, was running an admiring eye over the advocate as he mounted the marble steps with a high action that made him reverberate beneath his feet.
I would read the Hindi version. हमारे यहाँ एक नया अधिवक्ता आया है, डॉक्टर बुसेफालुस। उसका बाहरी आकार एवं स्वरूप उसके उस समय की बहुत हल्की सी याद दिलाता है जब वह मैसेडोनिया के सिकंदर का जंगी घोड़ा था। परंतु जो उन तथ्यों से परिचित हैं, उनका ध्यान कुछ चीजों पर अवश्य ही जाएगा। मैंने कुछ ही समय पहले भवन के प्रवेश द्वार की सीढ़ियों पर एक बेहद सामान्य कोर्ट सेवक को एक दौड़ प्रतिस्पर्धा के नियमित मेहमान की विशेषज्ञ निगाह के साथ अधिवक्ता को आंखें फाड़कर देखते देखा जब वह अपनी जंघाएं उठाए संगमरमर पर खुले हुए कदमों के साथ सीढ़ियां चढ़ रहा था। Now, while translating this part, see, in seinem Äußern, we have used this word as a verb. Okay, Äußern is a verb, and we never used it as a noun. Seinem Äußern. Äußerung is the word. Then Äußern word is expression, express. But here, when we want to say that, we want to express that the kind of his attire, the way he presented himself. So we cannot do here literal translation expression. We cannot do, है ना? वो ऐसे प्रकट कर रहा था नहीं बोल सकते. So for this we had to take some more words. उसका बाहरी आकार एवं स्वरूप, the way he presented himself. So again, so word to word translation is not possible. Then second thing, घोड़ा. अब घोड़ा की जगह we could have used the word ashwa also, but why didn't I use the word ashwa? Ashwa, number one, तो Franz Kafka's language is simple language that has layers of understanding, but the language is not very difficult, which you would find difficult. So ghoda is a word of normal use, and ashwa is a very high society. Even if I compare the Hindi literature writers, I would compare that Jashankar Prasad would have used the word ashwa, whereas Premchand or any other writer would have used word ghoda. So ghoda I found more appropriate. So these are two things in this paragraph which I found that I would mention here. Then in case we have no questions, we can come to the second text.
Im Allgemeinen billigt das Burrow die Aufnahme des Bucephalus. Mit erstaunlicher Einsicht sagt man sich, dass Bucephalus bei der heutigen Gesellschaftsordnung in einer schwierigen Lage ist und dass er deshalb sowie auch wegen seiner weltgeschichtlichen Bedeutung jedenfalls Entgegenkommen verdient. Heute, das kann niemand leugnen, gibt es keinen großen Alexander. Zu mordern verstehen zwar manche, auch an der Geschicklichkeit mit der Lanze über den Bankettisch hinweg den Freund zu treffen, fehlt es nicht und viel ist Mazedonien zu eng, sodass sie Philipp den Vater verfluchen. Aber niemand kann nach Indien führen. Schon damals waren Indiens Tore unerreichbar, aber ihre Richtung war durch das Königsschwert bezeichnet. Heute sind die Tore ganz anderswohin und weiter und höher vertragen. Niemand zeigt die Richtung. Viele halten Schwerter, aber nur, um mit ihnen zu fuchteln. Und der Blick, der ihnen folgen will, verwirrt sich. Abhishek?
Yes, ma'am, I'll go ahead. In general, the bar approves the admission of Yusuf Alice. With astonishing insight, one tells himself that in today's society, Yusuf Alice is in a difficult situation, and therefore, considering also his importance in the history of the world, he deserves at least a friendly reception. Today, it cannot be denied. There is no Alexander the Great. There are plenty of men who know how to murder people. There is no lack of the skills they needed to strike a friend with a lance over the banquet table. And for many, Macedonia is too narrow, so that they curse Philip, the father. But no one at all can lead to India. Even in his days, the gates of India were unreachable, yet the king's sword pointed the way to them. Today, the gates have receded to remoter and higher places. Nobody shows the direction. Many carry swords, but only to brandish them, and the eye that tries to follow them is confused.
साधारण तौर पर बार बुसेफालुस की सदस्यता का अनुमोदन करता है। आश्चर्यजनक निरीक्षण के बाद इंसान अपने आप से कहता है कि बुसेफालुस हर हाल में अनुग्रह के योग्य है। एक तो वह वर्तमान सामाजिक स्थिति के हिसाब से बहुत कठिन परिस्थिति में है, तथा इसलिए भी कि उसकी विश्व इतिहास में महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका है। इसे कोई नकार नहीं सकता कि कोई सिकंदर महान आज है नहीं। कुछ लोग हत्या के बारे में अवश्य जानते हैं, उसके कौशल निपुणता के बारे में भी। भाले से प्रीतिभोज की मेज के उस तरफ दोस्त पर वार करना, यह आज भी जारी है। और बहुतों के लिए मैसेडोनिया बहुत छोटा है, इसलिए वे फिलिप पिता को कोसते हैं, पर कोई भी भारत की ओर जाने का दिशा निर्देश नहीं देता। तब भी भारत के द्वार अगम्य थे, पर राजकीय तलवार उसकी दिशा के संकेत देती थी। आज वे द्वार कहीं और चले गए हैं और दूर और ऊंचे हो गए हैं। कोई दिशा नहीं दिखाता। तलवारें बहुतों के पास है, पर सिर्फ इधर उधर हिलाने के लिए, और वह दृष्टि जो उसे समझना चाहती है उसे संभ्रम में डाल देती है। Now in this paragraph, what I thought, I would like to mention here, बुसेफालुस हर हाल में अनुग्रह के योग्य है। The first and foremost and surprising thing, the author has assumed that this advocate is reincarnation of horse, and that horse belonged to Alexander. Surprisingly, the bar people have also accepted that fact. There is no magic, there is no science fiction, but they have accepted it. And while taking him in the membership of the bar, they consider, oh, he is in a very difficult situation. What difficult situation? He was, see, again, as I told, Kafka had a very, Kafka is writing loneliness, alienation, helplessness. So here also we find he is compared with the mighty horse of Alexander. And this new advocate, he says the horse was so mighty, but I am in a position where I am not finding myself so mighty. I am in a surrounding, I am in a society in which I cannot do what I want. As we all know, in the field of law, one is bound with so many things. So he is not able to do according to his free will. So he is feeling frail, fragile, helpless, and dejected. So again, his life is reflected into this. And asamanya vartaman samajik sthiti, the situations in which he is working presently. As a law, in the field of law, we all know the kind of work. So the kind of person Kafka was, he would not have been, must have been able to adapt himself with that norms. So he was not adjusting. and he found himself dissatisfied. Katin Parsiti, the same thing. He was finding it difficult to adapt himself to the norms of the society prevalent in that time. So Katin Parsiti. And so that is what is. It has nothing to do with the Alexander and horse. He is just saying that he is not that mighty, which the horse was. Any questions here, or would we go to another story?
I'm sure there will be observations. I would like to request all of you to also please keep writing in the chat. If you have any observations, we'll please take them up at the end once Dr. Chaturvedi is done with the presentation.
So then we can start with the new story, the artist plot.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a story. The story begins as a shoemaker begins to open his shop at daybreak. He notices that a large group of nomads from the north have filled the town square. The nomads show no signs of culture and soon transform the city into a veritable city. They show no respect for the townspeople and take everything they want from the stores without making any sort of payment. The emperor appears at one of the palace windows and looks on as the nomads take control of the city, but he is unable to do anything. The shoemaker concludes the salvation of our fatherland is left to us craftsmen and tradespeople, but we are not equal to such a task, nor indeed we have ever claimed to be capable of it. This is a misunderstanding, and it is proving it is going to ruin us. So that is a summary of the story, and then we would like to read the first text. Shruti, would you read that text in German?
Mm-hmm. Is this the one that you want me to read? Yes.
Sprechen kann man mit nomads.
It's not there on the slide.
Okay, then shall I read that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sprechen kann man mit dem Nomaden nicht. Unsere Sprache kennen sie nicht. Ja, sie haben kaum eine eigene. Untereinander verständigen sie sich ähnlich wie Dohlen. Immer wieder hört man diesen Schrei der Dohlen. Unsere Lebensweise, unsere Einrichtungen sind ihnen ebenso unbegreiflich wie gleichgültig. Infolgedessen zeigen sie sich auch gegen jede Zeichensprache ablehnend. Du magst dir die Kiefer verrenken und die Hände aus den Gelenken winden. Sie haben dich doch nicht verstanden und werden dich nie verstehen. Oft machen sie Grimassen. Dann dreht sich das Weiß ihrer Augen und Schaum schwillt aus ihrem Munde. Doch wollen sie damit weder etwas sagen, noch etwas erschrecken. Sie tun es, weil es so ihre Art ist. Was sie brauchen, nehmen sie. Man kann nicht sagen, dass sie Gewalt anwenden. Vor ihrem Zugriff tritt man beiseite und überlässt ihnen alles. English.
Yarini, are you there? Yeah. Who is there?
Professor, can I read?
Yeah, bitte.
Speaking with the nomads, it is not possible. They do not know our language and they barely have one of their own. Among themselves, they communicate like jackdaws. Again and again, one hears this cry of jackdaws. Our lifestyle, our institutions, to them, they are incomprehensible, as well as indifferent. Consequently, they show hostility also to any sign language. You can dislocate the jaw and squirm your hands out of the wrists. They do not understand you and will never do. Often they make grimaces, they turn the white of their eyes and foam swells out of their mouths. But by that, it is not that they mean to say something or even frighten you. They do it because such is their nature. What they need, they take. One cannot say they make use of violence. If they want something, everyone steps aside and lets everything go.
बंजारों से बातचीत नहीं की जा सकती। हमारी भाषा उन्हें आती नहीं, उनकी अपनी कोई है नहीं। एक दूसरे को समझने के लिए वे कौए की प्रजाति के पक्षियों जैसी आवाज निकालते हैं। ये आवाजें हर दम सुनाई देती हैं। हमारी जीवन शैली, हमारे कार्यकलाप, गृह सज्जा उनकी समझ से परे है और उन्हें इसकी परवाह भी नहीं है। इसके फलस्वरूप हर सांकेतिक भाषा पर नकारात्मक प्रतिक्रिया देते हैं। उन्हें समझाने के लिए आप जबड़े ऐंठ लेते हैं, हाथों को जोड़ों पर मोड़ लेते हैं, पर वे आपको नहीं समझते और कभी समझेंगे भी नहीं। अक्सर वे मुंह गिराते हैं, तब उनकी आंखों का सफेद हिस्सा घूम जाता है और मुंह से झाग निकलने लगता है, पर इस सबसे वे ना तो कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, ना डराना ही चाहते हैं। वे ये करते हैं क्योंकि यह उनकी आदत है। जिस चीज की उन्हें जरूरत होती है उसे वे ले लेते हैं। यह नहीं कहा जा सकता कि वे हिंसा का प्रयोग कर रहे हैं। उनकी इस कार्यवाही के पहले ही लोग एक ओर हो जाते हैं और सब कुछ उनके लिए छोड़ देते हैं। Now again, these nomads are symbolic. They are powerful people who have their own way of expressing, behaving, and dealing people. So, and they don't follow their other people's language. They don't even want to understand. They don't want to understand other people, and they don't even want themselves to make clear to other people. They have their own circle. They behave their own way, and they are very powerful. So when they come in the picture, people like us or people like common people, they always give way to them. And even if we try our level best to convince them, to make them understand something, they would show that they haven't understood. They would not try to understand, and rather they would present themselves in a way that we from our side surrender. That is a symbolic. There's nothing to do with the nomads or something else. This is again Kafka's helplessness in the society, the common man's helplessness in the society in front of the dominating powerful people. That is reflected here. So can we have the second text?
Ja. Dachte der Fleischer, er könne sich wenigstens die Mühe des Schlachtens sparen und brachte am Morgen einen lebendigen Ochsen. Das darf er nicht mehr wiederholen. Er lag wohl eine Stunde ganz hinten in meiner Werkstatt platt auf dem Boden und alle meine Kleider, Decken und Polster hatte ich über mir aufgehäuft, nur um das Gebrüll des Ochsen nicht zu hören, den von allen Seiten die Nomaden ansprangen, um mit den Zähnen Stücke aus seinem warmen Fleisch zu reißen. Schon lange war es still, ehe ich mich auszugehen getraute. Wie Trinker um einen Weinfass lagen sie müde um die Reste des Ochsen. Who wants to go? Abhishek? Angina? Do you want to go?
Yes, ma'am. I think
Yeah.
I lost my connection somewhere in the middle, but I can go ahead, or if someone wants to go ahead, they can go ahead as well. I have no issues. Should I go ahead, ma'am?
Yes.
Yes, right. So, not long ago, the butcher had a thought that he could save himself the trouble of slaughtering and brought in the morning a live ox. This must not happen again. I had to lie flat about an hour on the floor in the back of my workshop and had to put all my clothes, blankets, and cushions piled on me so that I would not hear the roar of the ox, since the nomads were leaping from all sides to tear away with their teeth pieces of its warm flesh. Silence had long settled before I dared to go out. As drinkers around a wine cask, they were laying, tired, around the remains of the ox.
अंततः कसाई ने सोचा कि वह कम से कम पशुओं को ज़िबा करने की जिम्मेदारी से तो बच सकता है और सुबह एक जीवित बैल ले आया। अब वह इसे कभी नहीं दोहराएगा। मैं शायद 1 घंटे अपने कारखाने में पीछे हक्का बक्का जमीन पर लेटा रहा और मैंने अपने सभी कपड़े, चादरें, तकिया अपने ऊपर डाल लिए थे ताकि बैल की अनवरत रोने चिल्लाने की आवाज सुनने से बच सकूं, क्योंकि बंजारे सब तरफ से उस पर टूट पड़े थे और दांतों से उसके गर्म मांस के टुकड़े नोच रहे थे। मैं जब बाहर आने का साहस जुटा पाया, उसके बहुत पहले ही सब कुछ शांत हो गया था। वे बैल के अवशेष के पास ऐसे लेटे थे जैसे पियक्कड़ एक बैरल शराब पीने के बाद थककर लेट जाते हैं। Again, the Muchadi thinks of finding a way, and he proposes a solution to those mighty people, and maybe we can do this way. And that solution is handled by those mighty, powerful people in a way that it got crushed into pieces. It lost its soul. And so then this person says, I will never try it again. It was vain. I could not achieve anything out of this. Then we have the next text. There is one more text. Gerade Damas.
No, it is not there.
Shall I read that?
Yes, it is. Gerade damals glaubte ich, den Kaiser selbst in einem Fenster des Palastes gesehen zu haben. Niemals sonst kommt er in diese äußeren Gemächer. Immer nur lebt er in dem innersten Garten. Diesmal aber stand er, so schien es mir wenigstens, an einem der Fenster und blickte mit gesenktem Kopf auf den Treiben vor seinem Schloss. Gina, you go.
Just a second, Professor. I'm not able to see the screen. Yeah. Exactly at that time, I thought that I had seen the emperor in person in a window of the palace. Otherwise, he never comes out to these outer chambers, as he only lives in the innermost garden. But this time, so at least it seemed to me, at the window, his head bowed, he looked down at the hustle and bustle in front of his castle.
तभी मुझे ऐसा लगा कि मैंने राजा को राजमहल की खिड़कियों में से किसी एक खिड़की पर खड़े हुए देखा है। वैसे इन बाहरी कमरों की खिड़कियों की तरफ कभी कोई आता नहीं। वे सिर्फ सब अंदरूनी बगीचे में ही रहते हैं, और इस बार वे खड़े थे। कम से कम मुझे तो यही लगा, एक खिड़की पर और सिर झुकाकर अपने महल के सामने के जनसमूह को देखते रहे। Here again, in this story, the emperor leaves to common people who are neither trained nor capable of handling such situation. The ultimate authority of the country is not taking any interest to help its citizen, which causes a feeling of fear and helplessness, and desperate people say that we will be ruined. Invasion of nomads leave people, and as leadership makes no effort to safeguard their people, so they are deprived of their own rights in their own land. If we observe it closely, it proves to be up to date and highly personal when we observe the time and situation of the writing. Central concern again is his personal adjustment. Reader ought not to get confused with the struggle in terms of rude nomads and the hapless citizen. It is again his adaptation problem with the society. So
the floor is open for questions and observations. You may please unmute yourself and speak. I will stop sharing the screen so that I may follow the chat as well.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I had a question, if I could go ahead. This is a wish.
Yes, please.
So, as ma'am had said very earlier in the beginning, in the introduction part, that she had translated a lot of other stories as well, apart from Kafka. And I've read a few Russian novels as well, Anton Chekhov's novels in English. And it always seems to me that there's always a sort of bleakness in the way that they write. As opposed to some English writers like I'm forgetting the name, Three Men in a Boat, the writer of Three Men in a Boat, and PG Wodehouse, who were writing almost similar time frames. So why, my question is basically why are these cannot be the only shared realities, because if one part of the milieu is writing happy, funny, non-serious stories, and the other part is only writing about the miseries of those times, how does it come about, man, is my question.
Right. See, as I told you, I described the Kafka's personal life also. He had lonely childhood. He was not very happy in the school and college days also. He got engaged twice, not got married, and then he got sick and he died at the age of 41 only. So all these facts, number one. Number two, he was born in Czech. He learned Czech. He was a Jew, but he was writing in German. And he said that was also his dilemma. And it was a time of political turbulence between Czech and all. It was a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the situation was very unstable. So the political instability, the family problem, his own loneliness, right from the beginning up to the end, and his father's dominating nature, and nobody there to share except for this, perhaps Max Brod. He was the only person who could understand him during his lifetime. So that is why from all walks of life, from all corners of life, he was dissatisfied, and that type of and helpless. He found himself helpless. So this helplessness has reflected into his literature.
Right, man, thank you.
May I go ahead for the next question, Professor?
Yes,
Shruti?
please. Yes.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, Professor SHIPRA, for this wonderful session.
Thank you.
As you were translating the stories from sort of German, and then we read the English version, and then you spoke your own Hindi sort of translations, I was trying to look at this process of translation as a mathematical equation. That how do you come to this translated, let's say, text in a language that you want, right? So there is the German, the original text, and then of course you have read other languages that you read, in this case English. So there comes a lot of other meanings and interpretations of the original text, and then of course you come at the language that you intend to translate the text in, which is the, and also which comes within the limitations of the vocabulary of the language. And also I am interested in this case at this question of the audience, or the audience that you have in mind for which you are translating the original text, right? So my question really is that, I mean, especially in the case of Kafka, because his works have been translated in so many languages, and not just the original, the lot of secondary works that has been done, which always keeps adding layers to this, the question of the meaning and the interpretation. So where do you really stop? Where do you find yourself that, okay, maybe I have an interpretation of the text, maybe I have understood the text, and then it's time when I could now translate this text. So that is my question. And then of course, as like how right it is to always sort of keep going back to the biographical and the different historiographies in this case, to go back to those details originally from the writer's life, when you have to, let's say, translate a fictional text, which, and these stories are really small, right? And this I'll just give like a small example of the usage of the word nomads, which particularly interests me in the second story, because and you use the word banjara from Hindi, right, which of course begs a totally different sort of connotation in Hindi, right? The word I could think of, I don't speak German, so I mean, when you use the word banjara, I was thinking, okay, maybe barbarians. If that were the English word being used in this case, then what would be the Hindi translation for this? And then how do you sort of struggle with these, translations, because these meanings of these words do not translate exactly in languages, right? Thank you.
So first of all, your first question, I never translate my literature from German through any other language. I translate directly from German to Hindi. Because see, this is my translation, true or false, good or bad, this is my work. If I take some other filter language in between, then I get disoriented. Right. So first thing I translate from German to Hindi. English version I was reading here just because the audience, most of the audience is not aware of the language German. And many of us, as I said right in the beginning, Hindi version is not enjoyed by everyone. So actually I wanted everybody should be taking interest in this context. What is this? So maybe as you right now said, Hindi. Hindi is not, number one, not palatable by everyone. Number two, everybody does not understand Hindi. And English, again, is a working language for everyone. And people are more comfortable with English. So that is why English version was there. That was the only purpose of keeping. So I don't use any filter language, number one. Number two, your second question was, I forgot your question was, why did I use the word Banjara?
No, I mean, I'm just citing that as an example. My question really is that, like, at what point do you really stop, let's say, interpreting, in the sense, when do you feel that, okay, you have understood the text and now it's the time to sort of, do the translation?
Again, to answer this again, I would go to the first part of my presentation. As I said, see, when I was translating the first story, The New Advocate, is a very small story. And when I was translating it, Ghoda, Sikandar, India, I was thinking, I mean, what I'm doing, is it right or wrong? Even I was confused. As you said, now where do I decide that it is done? So again, going back to his roots, his life, his writing style, people who have analyzed his way of working, people who have guided how to interpret him. Of course, I had to read a lot. This is just one-page story, and words are not very difficult, I would admit. And it took 4 or 5 hours for me to translate. And even I was thinking what I'm doing. And after that, even I was, after that also, I was not very sure. Then I went to net. I studied a lot of Franz Kafka's literature, comments about Kafka, interpretation about Kafka, people's suggestion how to interpret Kafka, and then I could come to this solution. And again, I cannot sit into Kafka's mind. I tried my level best to interpret him, and I think that's my job. I've done my job.
I'd like to just maybe add something here, another example. Ankur, if you've read the text that I had sent you, I've shared both the translations of Dr. Chaturvedi with all of you. Yeah. And if you read the text that I had sent, the Purani Pandulipi, which is the translation of Ein altes Blatt, the first sentence is also a very classic example. यह ऐसा है मानो हमने अपनी मातृभूमि की रक्षा का ध्यान रखने में कुछ असावधानी बरती. That's how Dr. Chaturvedi translates the first sentence of the story, which actually has the mention of Vaterland. And she uses the word Matribhumi instead of that. Maybe that would be one more point of discussion. Why did you choose to use Matribhumi? Secondly, it is not just Banjara that you use. I think you've also used other texts, like you've used Krur Khana Badosh.
Yes.
For example, you have also, but you did not use words like Yayavar, for example, which I would have expected.
Yayavar is a very positive. Yayavar is not negative, but this Banjara, this Khana Badosh, these are negative words. They don't have culture. Yayavar is not uncultured. It never depicts any uncultured person. Yayavar is traveler, but with positive meaning. And as you said, Vaterland and Matribhumi, India में हम मातृभूमि बोलते हैं. So and Vaterland, German people say Vaterland. So that's why Vaterland has to be translated into Matribhumi, because I am now writing for Indian readers. So Pitrabhumi word cannot be used. It has to be Matribhumi.
But it's very interesting because the concept of Vaterland is then also somehow within the text there are intra-textual references, right? I mean, there are connections between the Vaterland, the father figure, and the ox actually also. The bell that you have translated,
Yes.
somehow, within, if you keep reading the text, there's a good connection between the Vaterland and the bell, rather than saying, I mean, Matribhumi and the bell, because it becomes very difficult for anyone.
That doesn't help, of course, yeah.
This is a definite problem. I mean, because there is a possibility of connection between the Vaterland and the ox, who was being eaten by the nomads.
Yes.
Yeah, and which is also this is very symbolic at one level, yeah, which is certain symbolic order, which is totally broken down, etc., etc. So that's a line of thought there. There's another point that I wanted to perhaps in this context also talk about is the concept of the jackdaws, right? The story, the bird jackdaw, and which is a dole in German, and आपकी translation है कौवे की प्रजाति की पक्षी.
Because we don't have a word in Hindi for that.
So it's not kawa. You did not translate it directly to kawa. You said
kawa is not the right word. And this is a special species of kawa, a kind of a different variety of kawa. So I had to specify that.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Could you, Professor, also please maybe just talk a bit about why do you think nomads is a negative word? I just didn't get that. You said nomads is a negative word in Hindi.
Nomads are the people who move from place to place there, and their lifestyle. See, they're not educated people, number one. They are living their life from the hunting. And see, in Hindi also we say jungli hai. So it's not, and we never take Banjaras in a very good spirit, very good culture. And they are taken as kya Banjaro ki tarah behave kar rahe ho, uncultured.
All right, so that would be a very it's a perception, but we can obviously question this perception as well.
Of course.
I'd like to ask Jan Helge to please speak. Hi, Jan Helge, please go.
If I can unmute myself, yes, I can.
Yes,
thank you so much for the wonderful talk on how you went about and keep going about translating these texts. I mean, I just have some observations also to the discussion that is happening right now. So first of all, like the correct interpretation of the text you have to find, and then you can translate. That is obviously impossible, since not only any text, especially looked at from a different culture, is going to get a new interpretation, but especially in the case of Kafka, as you have pointed out, where every sentence begs the native German reader, interpret me. There is just no such thing in literature as a correct interpretation, beyond what maybe our students ask us for. What does it mean? Tell me, I can then write it down. So this, your idea, which I think is the correct approach to translation, is also like the current standard model, that contextual information you have to fill your head with, the surroundings, the lifetimes, the political situation, and all of this. And then, of course, during translation, this is then the background for your work, and not something that you have to fully focus on all the time. But so I agree with everything. The thing with the individual decisions that you make makes perfect sense for me, because I mean, in the context of the story of the nomads, this is not a documentary on TV, for example, where nomad culture is represented in a neutral documentary style, but it is the nomads, which are the people roaming the landscape. They are now invading the city, and this is then obviously a negative thing. Like these things, you can of course make a different decision and translate it in a more neutral way, but in the end, you're absolutely right to follow your assessment, your emotional assessment almost of the meaning in the original, and then translate it in that way. And the other thing is, for dole, what is it, jackdaw, and fatherland and stuff like this, I mean, that is just the problem of all languages, no matter where you translate, because there will always be, I mean, fatherland and motherland is a problem in most European languages. And then it's like, okay, do you translate it literally? kind of showing, carrying over this semantic connotation that this word then has from the original to the target language, but this makes it harder to read in the target language? Or do you say something that makes it easier, natural to read in the target language, as it was easy to read in the original language, but then you lose the connotation? This is a dilemma that you can never get rid of. And I think the examples of jackdaws and fatherland illustrate. I mean, either you do it semantically correctly, or you do it in an understandable way.
That's really so. Thanks a lot for such a critical analysis. I'm really thankful that you heard it so thoroughly and give a thorough discussion and thorough comments about that. But as far as you said, this dilemma and this delivering something from one culture to another culture, it is really difficult. And I recall once I was in literature colloquium wedding, and the person who was judging, who was chairing the session, he said, translators have a very bad habit of putting footnotes all the time. Now see what we do. There are certain things which are not in our culture, and I have to see, if I'm telling you the story, so the story is, it's not just a story, it's the place, it's the character, it's their dialogue, it's the circumstances in that they are. So if it is snow, if it is alm, how do I explain that? So I have to put a footnote that. So the same thing as you said, either you explain there and there only with some more words, or you put a footnote. Something has to be done.
And the footnote might not be, so to speak, inviting to the reader in the target language. I mean, there are some like students definitely who would appreciate footnotes, but the general reader that walks into a bookshop, I think also in India, I mean, Germany is maybe a little bit special because we like footnotes, but this is an exception.
No, but I would still say it is important, and I would rather, you know, for any kind of reader, whether it's a casual reader, the casual reader might just leave out the footnotes. But for an informed reader, you have to have those. I feel it is kind of, you cannot sum it up all. I would like to request Anu to please speak.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that talk, Shipra. That was really interesting. I also translate. I have been translating for a few years, well, about 15 odd years now, and it's again a process. So I could also relate to a lot of what you said. The thing that I wanted to mention was related to one of the questions about when do you as a translator know that you're done interpreting and now you can go on to translating. And I just wanted to say there is no such thing, agreeing with Jan Helge Weidemann, there is no such thing of, okay, now my interpretation is 100% complete, so I can go on to the next step. It's not like that. And there again, I think as translators, one has to walk this very thin line between how much do I want to put myself in the author's shoes and imagine what he or she meant to say, or one can just say the book as a finished process, as a finished product has absolutely nothing to do with the creator once it's released. And now, you know, what the author meant, what he wanted to say, etc., just doesn't play any role. And I, as a translator, don't even have to think about that. And then I can also leave out the author's biography, for example, and just kind of think of myself as someone who's in that sense almost creating a new text, you know, not really the words of Kafka, let's say, but mediated through us for a new word which is more suited to the realities of today, of our times or whatever, and our cultural context, in which we then also use a different language. What I wanted to ask you was about how you feel about, so there's this trend that's been there for a while now, that one leaves a lot of terms for which there is no exact equivalent in the original language. And one does that very often with terms in French, for example, or in Spanish or something of the sort. I haven't seen that so much with German, but yeah, it's a possibility. How do you find this as a practice? Because it's then left up to the reader. One assumes as the translator that the reader is either an informed reader and will know, or the reader will make the effort to go and find out. instead of there being a footnote put there or a kind of approximation. Because about your jackdaw thing, I was also thinking maybe one could also say something like "Kauwe jaise pakshi ki awaaz," something of the
That's
sort.
what she said. That's what she said. That's what she said. Yeah.
Those are the possibilities. But one could also perhaps just leave the name of the bird as it is out there and let the reader find out what it is. Do you think it's an enabling strategy for the reader, or is this a strategy that takes away from the power of the translator?
See, first of all, welcome. I'm glad to meet you, that you are also a translator. And may I ask you which language pair you translate? German or?
I've done both. So my mother tongue is also Hindi. So I've done some amount of literary translation and other kinds of translation from German to Hindi, and then some amount from German to English.
So we will later on, we'll keep in touch. Okay, Shruti, please give me her details. Okay, so
well, Anu is one of the speakers. You will get to listen to her as well. She's the second speaker.
That's so as see, first of all, my way of I try my level best to take each and every word written by the author. So that first of all, let me have a clear picture of what the author has written. Now, when I have a picture in my mind, this picture is mixed. It has German words, English words, Hindi words, all this mixed up. So that I first of all have a good picture of what the author has said. Then I want to bring it to the Hindi, pure Hindi, what a Hindi reader should have. Then how a Hindi author would have expressed the same thing when he would have been writing this text. Then the grammar, then the composition, then the words, then the register of the words, difficult words, simple words, then these all comes again, layers, these are different layers. The first picture is almost mixed, and I don't like to miss any word. I'll share one thing here. I translated one Franz Kafka's one novel in which they had some French sentences. I don't know any word of French. I didn't want to depend upon the Google translator. And luckily, as I told right now, I was in Switzerland, translation house Lorraine. So and they were all French speaking people. So I asked them, would you please help me in translating this? And they were great. They were really, they helped me with open arms, open mood. And they really gave me a lot of time and they were happy to help me out. So actually, I don't want, as it is, when we translate, there are some gaps. Despite of our sincere and level-based efforts, there are some gaps. I am not Franz Kafka. I am not Franz Hohler. I am not Stefan Zweig. I'm trying to read his mind. Okay. So after that, if I leave some words also deliberately, then it's a area of gaps and holes only. So I don't like to leave any word. I try to take every word into account when I read, when I interpret that, when I understand that, and then when I write. Of course, there are some gaps. We all are human beings. We cannot be 100% sure that what we have done is 100% correct, or I put my 100%, but it is 100% that we can never say.
I think there is a little difference in the approach. I think what Anu is also hinting at is, as a translator, how much am I willing to let go, and let the text speak on itself? I mean, how much power do I want to keep in my hands? And how much do I let the text say, okay, fine, this is fine. Secondly, I also want to make another point. When we use, for example, my use of Hindi. Now, Hindi is also not, the discourse on Hindi within our country is not also non-problematic, right? Now, the fact that I use certain Urdu words in certain areas, and I use certain very Sanskritized Tatsam words in certain areas, that actually also shows what I think of myself as a translator. It kind of reflects my thoughts in certain ways. I need to be very careful about that as well. So I was a little surprised that, okay, fine, maybe because you've interpreted the nomads in a negative way, hence you say Krur Khana Badosh, right? Whereas I was thinking maybe something else, but Banjara is also equally negatively connotated. you know. So, but then perhaps within the text, is he talking about nomads as negative? So that is also something that we need to know, and whether I myself am self-critical as well as a translator or not. Am I aware of the discourses within my own culture that I'm trying to reflect through my writings or translations? Am I not propagating the already existing hierarchies, the already existing tensions through my writings? You know, that is also perhaps important. You know, that's a question that perhaps every translator should ask oneself. Yeah, Jan-Helge, you wanted to say something.
But while translating, I am not, I was not writing it, that was not my original writing. I was just putting what Kafka wanted. Kafka treated nomads as a negative character. That was very clear from the writing, because he portrayed nomads as a barbarians. They were not, they're cruel. They were not cultured. So that is what I was, and I think I was supposed to present that.
Yeah, but you did not use, I mean, is there no other way instead of using an Urdu word there, perhaps, you know?
That, of course, it's my style. I use so much of Urdu words in Hindi because I am living in Lucknow, and Urdu is so much mixed in my speech and writing. I mean, I can't.
That's interesting. I mean, these are things that we need to discuss.
Certain words, certain Urdu words I find very good. Nafrat, ghina ki jagah nafrat I use, and I find Urdu as it is a very sweet language, and I like to use Hindi words, Urdu words.
Yeah, great. Jan-Helge, please.
I find this discussion very lovely because, you know, I mean, nomad obviously is also not a German, like a Germanic word. So it's also taken from a foreign language. So yes, use an Urdu word that captures it perfectly if you when you translate it to Hindi. But what I actually wanted to say, I mean, I just know the situation in Germany, and I know that especially the translators, the German translators translating from Chinese texts, so contemporary Chinese literature, but also classical Chinese literature for the German market. If you leave a Chinese word unexplained or just put the so to speak Chinese character there on the page, your publisher is going to hit you. I mean, that's just not a possibility. They're not ever going to publish that. And if you have a text that is hard to read, your publisher is also going to hit you. So they want to sell the copies. There is, to some extent, I mean, I understand where you are all coming from, and also saying more information is better, especially for the informed, especially the academic reader. But it's just like, for example, the German book market would never accept that. And I'm reminded, because I'm doing that with English literature students right now at Delhi University, where I teach usually in the German department. I'm doing the English translation of Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf. And Steppenwolf, I also, in my introductory session on that for those students last month, I was talking to them about, there are several translations of the text. And the German publisher kept complaining, Suhrkamp, the publishing house Suhrkamp, kept complaining for actually almost 90 years or something, yeah, because only in 2012 did they do a proper scientific good translation. The only problem being with that translation into English, it is very close to the original text, but it is unreadable. The Steppenwolf translation from the original 1929, I mean, Steppenwolf was from 27, and so the English translation was 29, so very quickly, because T.S. Eliot liked the work so much by Hesse. The point being that this translation is not very authentic, yeah, not close to the German original, but it became the subculture, you know, all this hippie culture Bible in the United States, and the text thus has really earned a place in American culture in a way that a correct translation or closer to the original translation never could have. So to some extent, I will always fall on, yeah, translate it so that it appeals to as many people as possible, even losing the original syntax, for example. This was something Suhrkamp was especially unhappy with, that Hesse's sentences are very long, and the bad English translation breaks them up into shorter sentences to make it easier to read. Well, Hesse sold more copies in English than in German. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you here.
I'm finished.
Barfoner also writes very long sentences. The whole paragraph, at times it's a page. So people say, why don't you break into Hindi smaller sentence? Again, here, as you said, I try my level best to maintain that rhythm of the author. If I can manage that sentence in the same length in Hindi also without losing the beauty of the Hindi version, I try to do that. But in case I'm not able to do, then only I break the sentences. Whereas people say, why do you struggle so much with that big sentence, one page, one para sentence? And you could have broken it to small sentences. That would have been easier for you. So as you said right now, sorry to disrupt.
No, that was actually like really what I wanted to say. This is again a decision when translating, and the point is, I mean, a lot of the translators that I know, like the German translators into the German language, they would say there's just not a question. You can't go close to the original if it doesn't work for the German mass audience that is supposed to pay for the book, and that is the current situation in Germany for the translators.
And Zoopoetics is a big publisher. You cannot question.
Okay. Yeah, Anu, please.
Yeah, just because we are talking about, not particularly just translating Kafka, but translating generally, I was thinking also, I was reminded of this a Walter Benjamin essay, The Role of the Translator, or Die Aufgabe des Übersetzers. And there again, I mean, there's this tension between the two forms of translating. One where you try to make the reader feel that the text he's reading, the translated text he's reading, is not a translated text at all. So you kind of smooth over all the foreignness, so to speak. And the other one, which Benjamin, of course, pleads for or advocates, is the one where you let the text and its foreignness stand out as it is, instead of trying to smooth over, iron over anything that, is jarring or incomprehensible in the target language. And there again, I feel translating is actually, I mean, you can never really say, okay, I go with this or I go with that. The second version, as Jan Helge Weidemann just said, the publisher would kill you. And nobody would buy the translation, because it's obviously also a question of the market. You produce a translation because a publisher wants to publish it and thereby probably make some amount of money at least. And if you don't do that, then of course, I mean, there's this kind of little zone in between where I think translators live. And it's sometimes going a little bit to this side and sometimes a little to that side, and sort of trying to find a balance, something which makes the translation also a little experimental without, becoming a disaster for the market. And I think that's the exciting part of translating always.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anu. That's a very important point. And Professor DENGLE, please.
Yeah, very interesting discussion. There's no question about it. And thank you so much for your talk. Schleiermacher, Benjamin. I mean, the thing is, and the publisher playing the spoilsport, I mean, my question while translating Herta Müller, for instance, and the publisher saying that, you can't do this, I mean, for instance, it just hijacked the whole thing from us, the translators. And I thought that the title of Atem Shaukil, I think we had done a wonderful job when you said that Meri Yado ka Vyakaran, and I thought it was the grammatic manner in the room. I thought it was really wonderful, I mean,
that sounds really good.
Yeah, but the editor, I'm putting the word editor in quotes, of the publishing house, he said, "Ye kya hai?" I mean, by that time, because we also translated from German into Hindi directly, the English translation had not appeared by then. But then in the meantime, the English translation happened, and it was the hunger, whatever, So that word hunger had to come. And so they translated it. By the time I had lost complete interest in because there was no dialogue. There was absolutely no discussion, And so it became Bhook Ka Vyakaran. So I said, all right, you at least Vyakaran is there, because the the freedom that the writer enjoys and exercises while working with language is something which is so obvious in Herta Müller, and it is, see, it's very, again, I'm putting it in quotes, very easy to paraphrase it and say that, look, this is the story of this guy in a gulag and so on and so forth, and just put a full stop to it, and the copies will sell, and people say, okay, he was in a gulag, went through all that, that pain and so on and so forth. Wonderful, And see, the thing is, just one thing, and then I'll close, because I was involved in, as a co-supervisor, shall we say, to go through 2 PhD dissertations on the translation of Marathi Dalit autobiographies into Hindi. Okay. Now I read both, Daya Pawar, Baluta, and so on and so forth, And I found that the translator had made no effort whatsoever to find out whether such abusive idiom, shall we say, exists in Hindi, No. So it had just been paraphrased, and it was like a gali or something like that, And so I was just asking the person who wrote, the student who wrote this PhD, whether he had gone into this question at all, or whether it is the job of the translator to simply tell a story, And what story? And coming back to Kafka, incredibly difficult, because, as you said, Professor Chaturvedi, that Kafka is failed at making sense of life, and then you are making the reader make sense of Kafka. In translation. It is a situation which is very extreme. My only thing was, how do I communicate as a translator the quality of experience that is there in the original text, the extreme nature of that experience. Do I have the right? Do I have that freedom to sort of dilute it to such an extent, for fear of whatever the copies may not sell, and or whatever it is? Is that ethical in any which way, So, but thank you very much.
Not at all. Not at all. I don't agree with that. And diluting a situation just because it is not sell, it is not at all accepted in the field of literature, literary field, literary area, literary circle. Not at all. People have written so many things which are against society, against people's wish, and they have written it. They have dared to write it. So literature is a field where one should express freely. So diluting just for sake of fear should not be there. Of course, it's very important. Again, people who said that you translated that sentence and it may lead to a riot in that city. I'm not writing that. I'm just translating that. And if I don't translate that, what he has written, I'm not just in that. I'm not doing justice with that author. That's not my views. That's the author's views, which I'm bringing it to you. Why do you need to create a right for that?
Right. Yeah. Do we have any other questions or observations from our audience? Professor Dengle, is that a new hand raised? Or all right, that's the old one.
Sorry, I forgot to lower it.
All right. Okay. Do we have any other questions or any observations from the audience? Yes, Durga, please.
I'm actually shivering right now because I don't know, Dengle. So I have all of you. I know every one of you through my professors, right? I mean, my current professors. And thank you so much, Chaturvedi ma'am. I can't believe I'm really talking to you right now. And my question is actually that I am learning translation, and we have been told that it is a duty to stick footnotes and give that explanation. And so you can't definitely include your whole research process in the translation, just as we give our assignments, actually submit our assignments. But where in literary translation do you feel it's appropriate and suitable and not going to disturb the reader's flow? And where do you think it's okay to have a footnote and not have a footnote? And where have you given footnotes? I'm sorry. Yeah.
See, there are two ways. Either you describe the word then and there only, or you put a footnote. So if possible, that word can be explained. For example, dish. I was translating a novel in which there were so many Turkish dishes. So all those Turkish dishes we cannot translate. So I would put at certain places I would put the name of the dish, bracket mein I would put the explanation. And if there is something very important, too much of information is there which cannot be put in 2-3 words, then I would put a footnote. Explanation has to be there. What is that?
Can I just add, I mean, many novels, at least in previous ages, one can say right now, included like a preface, foreword, or even an afterword that then said, and in this book we have just met so many dishes from Turkey that we didn't like translate, but you know, here they are, or something. You know, sometimes that actually makes it easier to keep the flow of reading of the main text going, like to put it either before or behind it in, you know, another text. Yeah. But it's all problematic.
Yeah.
All right, Rashmi, yes.
Yeah, I had a question regarding the translation of puns, sarcasm, and jokes, because I've always found it very difficult. Do you have any tips for that?
Good. Jokes. As I mean, just now Mr. DENGLE was saying the idioms were, there was no effort to translate idioms or something of that kind. So again, when we translate, there are certain poetries, there are certain games. I would give one example to your question. There was a children's novel which was I was translating. It was written by the Turkish lady who writes in German. So there was something like a German child would be saying something tick tock, ding dong. Well, the Tanseki is in the something. So then they had some rhythmic words. Now what I am supposed to do, I cannot write that the whole poem that way. So I would take some words, the literal words which I can translate, I would translate that particular line. And for that translation, I will find those rhythmic words so that it becomes a game of children. That sort of effort is to be made. As far as pun is concerned, this is really difficult to translate. Sometimes we get easily, sometimes we get difficult, sometimes we don't get. So there is no blanket answer for this. So we cannot say, okay, this has to be done. And jokes, of course, same is with the idioms. So this keeps happening.
I found it interesting that you translated trinker, the word trinker, as piyakkad, and not as sharabi. Or the piyakkad has got a very colloquial, very slang kind of a feel to it. Yes. And you decided to do that, right? I mean, why was that? I mean, could you maybe
again, trinker was something a word used by people while they're talking to each other. It's very common words. It was not something of a high literature. And in Hindi also we should say piyakkad. And sharabi, kababi, sharabi is again that's below that. Piyakkad is still a more elegant word compared to sharabi. Sharabi is something more, I mean,
interesting
level. So I prefer piyakkad.
Right.
Can I make one observation on the translation of jokes, just because this is something that is obviously, you know, a very problematic thing. But again, I would say, well, if it makes people laugh in the original language, then it has to make people laugh in the translated version. And I mean, I speak as somebody who grew up with like Chinese movies and Italian movies dubbed into the German language. And the shock that I had when I then like was not a teenager or a child anymore was that the originals were not as funny. The German dubs of those Hong Kong action movies and Italian Western movies and other comedy movies, they're just better than the originals. And I mean, again, good. It doesn't have to be like in that sense. Yeah.
Great.
No, that was my observation. Thank you so much.
All right. Maybe a little mention on, let's talk about, maybe before we end, maybe one part which perhaps we haven't covered is the interpretation. Now, you did interpret the texts, right? And since Ankur had also raised the question of when is it really the time when you know what interpretation it is, I feel, you know, that you are as a translator also evolving. You know, there is a lot of process. I'm sure you must have felt that too. While translating, you have evolved as a person, that you learned a lot and also changed, so that the interpretation actually also evolves with your evolution, so to say, right? Now, you would agree with this, right? Now, was there any difference between before you started working on a text and the end product? Did in your understanding of the text? Now, that would be my question. Say, for example, Bucephalus, right? I'm so happy because it's because you know German that you actually write Bucephalus and not Bucephalus or something else, right? Which would have been the case if it had been in English, translated from the English, for example. It's a very common thing. I mean, it's a very clear Bucephalus. But the fact that it's a horse, well, and however, Bucephalus himself, I mean, the figure of Bucephalus, you said while you were discussing about it, that it has got nothing to do with the historical Bucephalus. Do you really agree with that? Because if I look at it, you know, I mean, one could look at it this way. Why would he use Bucephalus at all? Why Alexander? And I read a little bit about it. And if you look into the Greek etymology, it comes from bous, which is ox again. See, because we're talking about Baal and ox, and I see the connection there. Yeah. And I'm sure all our students will also see that. And Kephalos, which is head. So this is basically, you know, this was a type of branding that happened during the in the Greek during the times of the Greek, in the ancient Greeks, and they used to mark every horse with a stamp basically on their buttocks. You know, and there were different kinds of, and that was the practice actually. And so if you had a sun sign, then it was a samphorai. If you had a Q kappa sign, then it was a kapotiai. And if you had an ox head on the buttock, then it was bucephaloi. Oh. Yeah, so that's where it actually comes. And that's a connection between the ox and the bucephalus. You know, these are very interesting connections within the text, which perhaps even as a text, as a translator, perhaps one could also look into. You know, it's very interesting, because otherwise why? And then why is the ox in the end there all of a sudden? Why does an ox spring out of nowhere? So perhaps these connections, while we are interpreting, and this is actually for my students and for other students, MA students who've joined us today, that perhaps while you're interpreting a text, you need to also see into the interconnections that are present within the text. And that is perhaps important, and that would then also make you understand and inform your translation of the text. Yes, Rashmi, please.
Your example reminds me of when I asked my teacher the same question, that if there is a text and let's say there are some cultural symbols that are interpreted differently in different cultures. For example, an owl. For the Westerners, it's a symbol of intelligence, but for us, it's of stupidity. Yeah. So if an author uses that in their text, would you stay truthful to the what the author has written and translate owl as ullu, or would you go with the meaning and translate it as something else? Or when the text has both the functions, would you let one go and just stick to one function?
Is a question for Shruti or me?
I'm assuming it is for you. It is for you.
Okay. So first and foremost, I think my loyalty is to the author. I would go with the version the author wants to say. But of course, if it is such a strong opposite meaning, then I have to explain it somewhere. Because otherwise, my reader would not be able to associate themselves with that reading. So that explanation I have to give. Because I know both the cultures, so I am a bridge between two. I have to explain it.
Shipra, would you please just maybe comment on my point also, whether you see there.
Actually, it's an insight for me, Shruti. This aspect I really missed, and this was a news for me. It was totally new thing for me, Shruti. Thank you very much for that.
All right. Okay. All right.
What I said, we can never say Franz Kafka's writing layers after layers after layers after layers. The more you read, the more you get. It reminds me of Kavidas. The more you dive, the more you get knowledge. The more you get confused. So it is layers after layers, layers after layers. You can't say now this is the end, as we discussed right now. That end point never comes. Thank you for that input.
Because the ox, the allegory of the ox is very important, I feel. I mean, for all the students here, you know, I mean, and who is an ox, for example? It's a bullock and it's a castrated male. You know, are we talking about male castration here? Is Kafka, what is he really? And why the Bucephalus was actually won by Alexander. Yeah, and it was Philip who said, okay, my son, oh, great, good going, you tamed the horse. And now you have the right to go and conquer the world.
Yeah.
That was the attitude. And this is precisely this father and son relationship that one perhaps also needs to look at, you know, which somehow interestingly gets all, I mean, dramatized to the figure of the ox and the horse. I'm so intrigued, you know, and I just do not stop being intrigued by Kafka, really.
Thank you so much for that.
Yes, Professor DENGLE, yes.
Yeah, just wanted to add to what Shruti said earlier about, you know, and we're talking about interpretation, we're talking about making sense with the help of an experience of someone else, you know, that's the definition of philology. And what I really liked what you said, Shruti, was, you know, that the power of the text has the ability to make the reader question the subject-object relationship, you know. Absolutely. That the nomad is not an object. If you turn him into the subject, you know, then the rest becomes the object, you know, the bull is a and so on. So I think this is the energy or the power of that text, which brings about a change in the way I have learned to perceive things. And I learned that, you know, it's perhaps possible to shift my focus, you know, get out of myself, look at myself as an object, as it were. You know, cliches, I know, but that is the power of good literature. And the second thing, of course, is, I think we talked about it in an informal chat, Shruti. There is a preface of translation of Proust, and then there is a quotation of Proust which says that all good literature is written in a kind of a foreign language, you know. And I remember when we read out the first draft of our translation to the who's who of Hindi literature in Maxwell Bhavan, Delhi, you know, there was a discussion amongst them, what is Hindi? So that's also another point which you made, and I thought, there was some sentences which I thought was, said in the novel by a very young fellow. So I used the kind of Hindi that you hear in the Bollywood movies, and Apunko and all that, and it was demolished, like, this is not Hindi, and so I mean, just to add to that, a wonderful point, Shruti. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, do we have any other observations? Shipra, would you like to maybe respond to any of the points that were taken up? Because we will now wind up slowly after this.
See, first of all, I'm so thankful to all the people who have raised questions, who have heard me with patience and critically analyzed that and raised question. And I hope so I am able to answer them to their satisfaction. That's all what I have to say. I'm very thankful to you, Shruti. Thankful to the team, technical team, for good support, strong support.
Yes, it has been a lovely evening, an evening well spent. I'm sure all of us will agree here who have stayed on. And thank you so much, Dr. Chaturvedi, for being with us. My students, would you like to unmute and say thank you to Dr. Chaturvedi? Your last words? She was here for you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shipra. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Jan Helge. All right. So with that, I would like to then close the session. Thank you so much. And I would like to invite all of you to the next session, which is on the 7th of April. Anu, am I right? I think that is the 7th of April. Right. Anyway, I will be sending out all the information before the event. And there is, a lot to come. I'm really excited. We had such a lovely beginning. We had our points put across. There was the lovely discussion. And I think we have, Dr. Chaturvedi has given us a lot of food for thought, laying down the basic foundation. We've got to know who Franz Kafka was, his life, his work, and her interpretation of how she sees Kafka, for example, and his work. So that was very important. And for example, I mean, and that only goes on to show that every interpreter, every translator has a viewpoint which that translator also puts across, right? Obviously, that is important. The entire kind of research, you also all got to know about the amount of research that goes into any kind of translation work. Yeah, you had the good, you had the opportunity of listening to so many people who do translation, authentic people, authentic work that they do, and their opinions, which is so good. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And that would be it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Everyone, have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.